The palace gates were closed that morning. Reporters waited, cameras silent. And then, an official stepped out with trembling hands. The royal family had just confirmed the unthinkable. Something has happened to Prince William, and the world will never be the same again.
It started as an ordinary morning in London. The sun had barely risen over the palace gates when something changed, a kind of unease that moved through the city like a shadow. By 6 a.m., Buckingham Palace was surrounded by flashing lights and silent reporters. No one knew exactly what had happened, only that something had gone terribly wrong during the night. Just after sunrise, the palace spokesperson stepped onto the courtyard steps. He held a thin sheet of paper, his fingers shaking slightly as he began to read. The royal family regrets to inform the public that His Royal Highness, Prince William, has been hospitalized following a sudden medical emergency. His condition is described as serious but stable. Further updates will follow. The words hit like a storm. Across the world, news channels broke their regular programs. Social media exploded with disbelief. Prince William, the man the world had watched grow from a boy mourning his mother into a future king, was now fighting for his life. Within hours, the gates of St. Mary's Hospital became a sea of cameras, flowers, and whispers. Royal guards stood at attention, trying to hold back crowds that grew by the minute. The air was cold and heavy with fear. At 9:12 a.m., a black Range Rover pulled up. Kate Middleton stepped out, her face pale, her eyes swollen from tears. She didn't look at the cameras. She just clutched the hands of her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and little Prince Louis, and walked quickly through the hospital doors. The flash of cameras followed her, but she didn't flinch, not once. Inside, the hospital felt still, too quiet. Security lined the corridors. Doctors whispered in low tones. William was in the intensive care wing, surrounded by a small team of royal physicians. They said he had collapsed suddenly the night before while reading bedtime stories to the children. Kate had found him moments later, unconscious, unresponsive. Her scream had echoed through Adelaide Cottage before the royal medical team rushed him to London. The diagnosis was still unclear. Some reports suggested exhaustion. Others hinted at something deeper, a possible cardiac issue, a hidden condition perhaps triggered by stress. But no one outside the royal circle knew for sure. And the palace, as always, stayed silent. Kate sat beside his bed, holding his cold hand, watching the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Every beep felt like a prayer. His skin looked pale, almost ghost-like, and she could barely recognize the strong, steady man who had stood beside her through everything. The man who carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders and still found time to make his children laugh. At noon, King Charles and Queen Camilla arrived. Charles looked older than ever. The weight of years and duty showed on his face. He walked slowly down the hall, nodding to the guards, his lips pressed in a tight line. When he entered William's room, the silence deepened. He approached the bed, his eyes glistening. He placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. "Stay with us, my boy," he whispered, voice breaking. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the machines filled the room. Outside, the world waited. Crowds grew. Candles flickered along the palace gates. Old women cried softly into scarves. Somewhere, a street musician began to play "Candle in the Wind." It felt like 1997 all over again. Diana's face, her smile, flashed across screens once more. The comparisons were unavoidable. The same grief that had swept through Britain all those years ago seemed to hover again, unseen but undeniable. That evening, an emergency meeting was held at the palace. Senior aides, advisors, and physicians gathered in a private room. Behind closed doors, discussions grew tense. If William's condition worsened, what would happen next? Who would step forward to take his duties? But none of that mattered to Kate. She stayed beside him all night. At 2:15 a.m., she finally dozed off in the chair by his bed. Then suddenly the monitor beeped faster. Doctors rushed in. Kate jolted awake, terrified. But it wasn't a decline. It was a sign of life. William's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused, blinking under the harsh hospital lights. Where am I?" he whispered weakly. Kate burst into tears. "You're safe," she said, holding his hand tight. "You scared me." William gave a faint, tired smile. "I'm sorry, darling." The words barely came out, but they were enough. For Kate, it was all that mattered. Doctors gathered around him, checking his vitals. He was conscious, but weak, his pulse steady, yet fragile. The doctors reassured the family that he was stabilizing, but recovery would take time. When King Charles was informed, he exhaled deeply, tears filling his eyes. He turned to Camilla and whispered, "Thank God." But even as he said it, something troubled him, a memory perhaps, or a fear he hadn't shared. By morning, the palace issued another statement. His Royal Highness is awake and speaking. He remains under medical supervision. The family thanks everyone for their kind messages and prayers. Britain sighed in relief. For now, the worst had passed. But the story didn't end there. That night, as Kate returned home briefly to comfort their children, she found something strange waiting for her. A small white envelope lay on her dressing table, unmarked, unsealed, but clearly placed there with care. No one on the staff admitted to touching it. No one knew where it had come from. Inside was a single piece of cream-colored stationery. Old, worn, slightly yellow at the edges. It bore a crest that hadn't been used in decades. The personal monogram of Princess Diana. Kate froze. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. And then she saw the handwriting. Flowing, elegant, unmistakable. "My dearest William," it began. "If you are ever lost, remember, the greatest burden of the crown is not duty, but love. Never let the crown weigh heavier than your heart. And if you ever fall, know that I am with you, watching, always proud." The signature at the bottom was clear. Love. Always. Mommy. Tears blurred Kate's vision. It couldn't be real. The letter looked old, the paper aged. But how could it appear now, after all these years? She checked the back of the envelope again. No date, no handwriting other than the note itself. That night, she sat in silence, holding the letter to her chest. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt Diana's presence in the room, soft, comforting, almost maternal. It was as if the late princess was watching over her son once more. The next morning, Kate returned to the hospital. She carried the letter in her bag but told no one about it, not even Charles. When she entered William's room, she saw him awake, his eyes distant. He looked weaker, but calmer. "I had a dream," he said softly. Kate smiled faintly. About what? He looked at her, eyes filled with something between awe and sorrow. About Mum, he said, whispered. She said, "It isn't over yet." Kate froze. Her fingers tightened around her bag. She wanted to ask more, but the doctors entered just then, checking on William again. She stayed quiet, but her heart raced. Later that day, when King Charles came to visit, he noticed something strange about his son. William seemed distant, thoughtful, not just recovering, but remembering. When Charles placed a hand on his shoulder, William looked up slowly and said, "Do you ever think she's still here, Father?" Charles hesitated. Then quietly he said, "Every day." Outside, the press still gathered, but inside those hospital walls, something deeper was happening. Something no one could explain. A prince nearly lost his life. A mother's letter returned from the past, and a shadow of Diana seemed to whisper again through the halls of royalty. The following morning, the air around St. Mary's Hospital was heavy with both relief and curiosity. Prince William was alive, conscious, recovering, yet something about him had changed. He was quieter now, more distant, his eyes fixed often on nothing at all. Kate noticed it first. He would stare out the hospital window for minutes, as if watching someone who wasn't really there. Once she caught him whispering softly, words she couldn't hear. When she asked, he just shook his head. "It's nothing, Kate," he said, but she knew it wasn't nothing. Later that day, King Charles returned, this time accompanied by the Archbishop of Canterbury and 2 royal advisors. Their meeting lasted nearly an hour behind closed doors. When Kate was finally allowed back in, William looked pale, almost shaken. "What did they want?" she asked gently. He hesitated, his voice low. "They wanted to talk about dreams." Kate frowned. "Dreams?" William nodded slowly. "They think I'm imagining things, but Kate, it felt real." That night, when the hospital wing grew quiet, William told her everything. "I saw her," he said. Kate froze. "Your mother?" He nodded. "She was standing by the window, the same way she used to wait for me after school. She looked peaceful. She didn't speak at first, just smiled, but then she said something I'll never forget." Kate leaned closer, holding his hand. "What did she say?" William's eyes glistened. "It's time to tell the truth, William. The truth they hid from you." Kate's heart pounded. Before she could reply, the monitors beeped softly, a nurse entered, and the moment was gone. The next morning, William was transferred to a private royal ward inside Buckingham Palace for further observation. Kate followed him closely, the mysterious letter still tucked safely in her purse. She hadn't told anyone about it. Not Charles, not the doctors, not even her closest friend. Something about it felt sacred, almost forbidden. When they arrived at the palace, the Queen's old chambers had been quietly reopened for William's recovery, the very same rooms where Diana once stayed. Kate couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on every wall. That night, after everyone had gone, Kate sat at the old writing desk. She took out the envelope again, studying the seal, faded gold, almost worn away. As she looked closer, she noticed something strange. Beneath the paper's corner, a second layer had been glued over another note. Gently, she peeled it back. Hidden underneath was another message, written in the same elegant script. "My darling boy, if you find this, know that there are those who will never forgive what I discovered. "Protect your heart and protect the truth." Kate gasped. Her hand trembled as she covered her mouth. What had Diana discovered? At that exact moment, the wind outside the palace howled, and from the corner of the room a faint creak echoed. The door to the balcony moved ever so slightly, as if touched by invisible fingers. Kate turned sharply, staring. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a faint white reflection, like the silhouette of a woman standing in the moonlight. Then it was gone. The next morning, William asked to see his mother's old belongings. The royal staff hesitated, but King Charles finally approved it. A wooden chest was brought from the archives, Diana's personal box, sealed since her death. When William opened it, the faint scent of her perfume filled the room. Inside were photos, letters, and old tapes, fragments of a life that had shaped him more than he ever realized. But tucked beneath it all was something no one had seen before, a sealed red folder marked "Private for my sons." He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of letters, photographs, and a small cassette tape labeled in Diana's handwriting. "The Truth, 1996. Kate covered her mouth. William looked at the tape, then at her. "Let's hear it," he said quietly. They played it on an old recorder, the kind Diana used during interviews. The voice that filled the room was calm, familiar, and haunting. "If you are hearing this, it means the truth has been buried. I've come to learn things that may never be allowed to reach the public, things about the crown, about what they fear, and about the danger my boys might one day face. The walls have ears here. I am being watched, but I must speak before they silence me." Her voice shook slightly. "William, Harry, my darlings, I love you more than life itself. Never forget that. But if something happens to me, promise me you'll never stop asking questions, because sometimes, even within the palace, love can be dangerous." The recording ended with a faint click. William sat frozen, tears streaming silently down his face. Kate reached for his hand, but he didn't move. Finally he whispered, "She knew." That night, William couldn't sleep. He walked alone through the dark palace halls, past portraits of ancestors and rulers who had long since turned to dust. He stopped before one, a large painting of his mother, painted shortly before her death. Her eyes, even in paint, seemed alive, filled with the same quiet sadness he'd always remembered. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why show me this now?" Suddenly a faint sound like the rustle of fabric came from behind him. He turned sharply. No one was there, but on the marble floor lay a single white rose. The next morning, William called his father. "Father," he said softly, "I need to know what happened that night. The accident. The truth." King Charles went silent. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "There are things, William, that are better left buried." William's voice hardened. "You mean hidden?" Charles closed his eyes. "You don't understand what this family has survived." William left the room without another word. That evening he returned to his mother's letter. As he read the words again, he noticed something new, a faint imprint on the paper, barely visible under the light. It was a royal seal, pressed into the corner. But it wasn't from the British crown. It belonged to the Spencer family, Diana's lineage. Beneath it, almost invisible, were 3 words scratched into the paper. "She was right." William stared at it for a long time. Then, with a trembling breath, he whispered, "Mum, I'll finish what you started." Kate walked in, her eyes red from crying. "William, what are you going to do?" He looked at her, calm now, but his voice carried a quiet strength. "I'm going to tell the truth, all of it." Kate shook her head, terrified. "If you do that, they'll destroy you." He smiled faintly. "They already tried." That night, under heavy rain, a single light burned in the Queen's private chapel. Inside, William knelt alone, clutching the letter, whispering to the mother he could no longer see. The candle beside him flickered, and for a brief second the faint reflection of a woman in white appeared behind him, soft, gentle, smiling. The next morning, the palace released a short, somber statement. Prince William is expected to make a personal address to the nation in the coming days regarding recent events and his health. But those close to him knew this would not just be about his health. It would be about truth, about legacy, and about a promise whispered by a mother long ago. That night, Kate looked out the window of their home in Windsor. In the distance, a faint figure seemed to move along the palace gardens, the shape of a woman in a flowing white dress, fading into the mist. Kate didn't move. She just smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, Diana."